Hi, I'm Jeff DeRiso from Beckmann Collaborative, and today I'm going to show you how to automate complex tasks with the Blueprints feature in Zoho Projects. This is going to be especially helpful for repeatable, multi-step tasks involving multiple members of your team. So let's get started. Okay, here we are in Zoho Projects. This is a project management application. We have a project, and then within a project, we can have a task list, and then tasks within the task list. We can also integrate Zoho Projects with our CRM to associate specific clients with specific projects. So let's open this test task that I created here. So you can see within the task, we have several details about the task itself. We have the owner who it's assigned to. We can set a specific budget for work hours, a start and due date, and several other details. We can have billable status. We also see the status of the task here. Now, this is really important. The status field helps us track the life cycle of a task. Now, the default values here are open or closed, but we can go in and create any custom status that we want. Now, you see, for example, we've created work in progress, waiting on client, and a few others. This is going to be important in our blueprint, and I'll show you that in a minute. The other thing I want to show you is that we can create subtasks within a main task. Now, these subtasks will have to be completed and closed before the main task can be closed. We also have the option to create dependency tasks, which is tasks that have to be executed in a particular order. But let's say you have a very repeatable process within your business that involves input from multiple team members, multiple steps that are always executed in the same order. Now, you could theoretically create dependency tasks for this, but that would involve quite a few manual steps that if you're trying to automate your project management, you'd want to avoid. So instead, what we want to do is use what's called a blueprint. So a blueprint allows us to create a custom lifecycle for a certain type of task matching certain criteria. Instead of trying to create several workflow rules to automate a complex series of tasks, what a blueprint does is instead create several different stages within a single task and allows us to execute those stages in a particular order. Let me show you how it works. So go to Setup, Task Automation, and Blueprint. Now you can see we have a few blueprints already written for our organization. So today what we're going to do is build a blueprint for an approval process for written content. Could be emails, blog posts, etc. And you can see we're already using blueprints for this purpose in our organization. So we'll click New Blueprint, and we'll call it Approval Tutorial. We'll select our layout, and this is where we select our criteria. We're going to select our test project so that we do not affect any of our real projects currently in progress. And we're also going to say task name starts with approval. What this means is that the blueprint will only be executed on tasks that match this criteria. So it has to be in the test project 2023, and the task name has to start with this string of text here, which is case sensitive. So if you typed in approval in brackets lowercase, it would not trigger the blueprint for that task. So it's a very specific way to segment a certain type of task and then apply the blueprints to it. So we'll click Save. And now here we are in our blueprint builder. And you can see we have all of our status fields over here, the ones that have already been created in our system. And we can also create a new status from this screen by clicking Add if we need to while we're creating our blueprint. So I'll drag and drop the first status out into the builder. Okay, so this is now the open status here. Now in our organization, we use this status for the time when the task has been created by the project manager, but is still awaiting further input before the work can actually begin. So our next status is going to be the work in progress, and we'll drag that out. But you can see it's not connected. So let's drag a connector here by just clicking on this circle and dragging it. Okay, so now we've created a connection between open and work in progress. but we need something in between. We need certain things to happen before it gets from here to here. So that's what we call a transition. So I'll click this plus and we'll give our transition a name. We're going to call it begin draft. Okay, and click save. Now, what this is when you're on the task itself and the status is open, you're going to see a button at the top of the task that says begin draft. So over here in our transition settings, we can define what happens before, during, and after the person has pressed this button. So first, what we want to define is who can see the button when they're looking at the task. This is the task owner by default. We can also add other people. We can add an administrator or any user within our organization. So now we want to decide what happens during the transition. So we click on during. Now this is what happens when the person clicks the begin draft button on the task. You can have a screen pop up with certain field updates. Now let's choose a field and say owner. Okay, and let's add it. And we will pre-fill the existing value, which tells us who the existing owner is. And we can also add start due date. And maybe we'll add comments. I'll make sure to uncheck mandatory for comments because that's going to be an optional update. So what's going to happen when the person presses the begin draft button is a screen is going to pop up with these fields only, making sure they're properly set before work in progress begins. And the reason we do that is because this is the stage where the draft itself is being assigned. Now, in your organization, you may have one person who's always writing the draft, but you also may have different people. So this is where we assign who's going to write the draft of the document. Now we can define what happens after the transition. So we can send an email alert, we can do a automated field update, and we also have more advanced actions like custom functions and webhooks. So for now, I'm just going to leave this and I'm going to drag our next status, which is going to be internal review. So after the draft has been completed, what we want to do is send it to the internal review stage. And we need another transition. So our transition is going to be send for review. Save that. And then again, we'll define the actions for before, during, and after the transition. So for during, let's add owner, because you're now selecting a different member of your team to do the internal review stage of the task. So we'll add that, and we will also add start and due date and set those. And we're also going to configure an email alert to be sent to the team member who has been assigned the task for internal review. So I'll click on email alerts, and this brings up the email alert templates that have already been made. Now I've already created one here for internal review, but I'll just click create email alert to show you how we can create a new one. And we can select a template. Now I use the internal review notification template, but let's create a new one. So this is where we can create a template. And if you see this drop down here called insert placeholder, this is where we can grab fields from our task and dynamically insert them into our message. So the name of the task owner, the description, the task name, any type of properties about the task, we can add them and into our custom email notification. And I'll show you how that works when we go through the demo. So for now, what I'm just going to do is select our pre-made template, blog ready for internal review, and click associate. Okay. And now we will go on to the next stage. So at this point, you could create another stage called internal edits if the internal reviewer sends it back for edits. But in our organization, we include that all in the internal review status. So our next status is going to be waiting on client, because what we're going to do next is going to send it to the client once we finish the internal review. So we'll connect those. We'll create a transition called send to client. Click save. Okay. Now we don't need any field updates here necessarily because we're not changing task owners. We're just sending it to the client and seeing what happens. So we won't add any updates here. Now we're going to want two different options from the waiting on client status because depending on what the client says, we're going to have two different courses of action. Now, if the client says they want to make some changes, we're going to have to do client edits. But if the client says, nope, the draft looks good, let's go ahead and publish it, then we'll move on to ready to publish. So now we'll connect these. So because we have two different options for statuses from the waiting on client status, we're going to need to create two separate transitions. So this will be approved. And this will be rejected. So depending on which option is selected, it will go to the appropriate status. Now, in the case that it's rejected, we may have to change our start and due date. So we want to bring those fields up when we do the rejected transition. Okay. And we will pre-fill the existing values. So now let's say it's been rejected and the client edits are now complete. We need to send it back to the client and go back to the waiting on client status. So if you see I try to drag here, that doesn't work, does it? So what we instead need to do is make the send to client transition what's called a common transition. So we'll select this, and what happens by default is that the send to client transition is now added to every single status. But we don't necessarily want that. We just want it added to the client edits and the internal review status. So here we can select this dropdown and deselect the other options because we only want to see the send to client option when we're in internal review or in client edits. So now you can see this connection has been established. So we will click out of that. Now it doesn't show when we click out of it, which is my only real complaint about this blueprint builder, to be honest. I wish that we could just see a little connection here, just as a visual thing to know that our blueprint is working properly. But if you do click on the transition, it will show you this line, this connection. So you'll know that the common transition is applicable. And when we do the demo, you'll see how it works. So now when a client comes back with edits, we can go through this process as many times as we need to before we get approved. So now let's say the blog is ready to publish. So now we need to close out our task. So let's select close and we'll create one last transition. Published. The other thing we can do is if we want to assign a different team member, for example, to do the publishing, we need to make sure that in the approved transition, we again bring the owner field up so that we can change it if we want to assign the publishing of the document to a different team member. We also may want to add a message. Now, let's say we're changing owners. We want to remind, please log your time before completing the transition. And the reason we want to add this message is because once the owner has changed on the task, the person who is no longer the owner will no longer be able to log hours within that task. So if in your organization you want to transfer ownership from one user to another, you need to make sure to remind people to log their time before they do the transition. So now let's publish this blueprint and test it. So here we are back in our project, and we'll click Add a Task. Set the name to make sure that it matches our criteria the way we wrote it. And we'll assign the owner as me so that I can perform the transitions here. And we'll click Add. So now you see on the task itself, there's a little lock icon next to the status field, and we are not allowed to change it. In comparison, when we look at this task that is not attached to a blueprint, we have the ability to change the status at any time. Now, on the blueprint, in order to change the status, we have to complete the transition. So it locks you into that specific process that you want your business to follow. So let's open the task. Now you see we have a button at the top that says Begin Draft. So let's click that, and that's going to take us to the first transition. So we can change our owner if we want to. I'll keep it as myself for now. We'll set a start and due date for the task, and we can add optional comments here if we want. Click Complete, and now you can see the status has been changed to Work in Progress, and we have our next transition button that says Send for Review. So let's say I've now completed the draft and I'm ready to send it for internal review. So I'll click the Send for Review transition. Again, I'll assign the team member who's going to do the internal review. I can set a start and due date or change the start and due date at this point if I need to. I'll click Complete. And now you can see the status has changed to internal review. And we have our next transition, which is send to client. Now remember, we sent an email alert based on this transition. So let's look in my email to see if I got it. So here we are in my email, and you see that I've received this automated email notification based on the internal review status. It says the task name and then assigned to you for internal review. These are dynamic fields that I pulled in. This is the task owner, which is myself. And we have the due date. So this is an example of the type of email notification that can be sent from a blueprint within Zoho Projects. So now let's say we've completed the internal review and we are ready to send it to client. So we'll click Send to Client. And we don't have any field updates in this transition. So it just gives us a "Are you sure?" message. We say okay. And now we're in the waiting on client status here. So the task will stay in this status until we hear back from the client. Now let's say they've come back to us and they want us to do some edits. So we'll click Rejected. And we're going to reset the start and due date if we want to, or we can leave them the same. We'll complete. And now we're in the client edits stage, and we're working on those client edits. And once we're done, we'll send it to the client once again. So now we're back to waiting on client. And let's say this time it's approved. Click Approved. Now we can choose to assign a different person to publish the post. And we also see our reminder here that we created. Please log your time before completing the transition. That was the custom message that we added in our blueprint builder. So whatever custom message you want to add on any transition, you can add it within that builder. We'll click Complete. And now the status of the task is ready to publish. And it's been assigned to the person to publish it. And once they publish it, they will click Published. Are you sure? Okay. And now the task has been closed. So you can see from this demonstration that the blueprint is a very powerful tool to lock in a certain type of task to a very specific process that has to be done in the same order. And I would encourage you to put it to use within your organization. You can always contact Beckmann Collaborative if you need any support with this. One more thing I forgot to mention is that you can customize the color of the transition within the blueprint builder, and this color will be reflected on the button that you see at the top of each task. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe for more videos like this, and we'll see you on the next one.